It is Romania Black, and it has been a crazy past 24 hours. There were a lot of storms that came through last night. I was up till like 2 a.m. I got a little bit of sleep, and then this morning I got home. I went to my parents because the storms were really bad, and they have a basement, and I was like, but luckily nothing bad happened, so that was good. But then I came home, and I was going to record this episode, and my internet went out, and I was like, oh! And so I have like a little tiny hotspot, but it does not have enough power to, it doesn't have enough power to charge up an episode to watch or load up an episode. So I had a file saved on my computer and I went ahead and recorded that. And then as soon as I was done, I got back on here. My internet was back. So I was like, haha. So I was like, yes. But I was really happy because I was tired of waiting on episode 10 of the Apothecary Diaries season 2. The last 3 episodes have been so good. Just 7, 8, 9 were just so fascinating, so intriguing to get into the Emperor's family and Ginshi's family, as it were. So yeah, I don't know. We kind of rounded out last episode. We learned a bit about the late Emperor. We learned a bit about Anshi, some more about her. We've learned a little bit about the current Emperor as we've gone. It feels like we're getting ready to learn more about Ginshi. That feels like the natural progression. We've learned about the family surrounding him. And of course, hanging in the air throughout this season, especially in the last 3 episodes, is Jinshi's concern that Maomao is going to figure out that he's not a eunuch and going to figure out that he's related to the Emperor, and she's going to put 2 and 2 together. And fortunately for him, but unfortunately for everybody else, Maomao's just like, what? What clues? What things right in front of me? So with that being said, we have a lot of comments to talk about, so I want to dive right into that, but I'm really excited that I get to watch this episode today, so I'm really happy about that. With episode 8, I have a couple comments from YouTube. Little dude, I loved this comment so much. Shisui is collecting bell crickets in episode 8. So they were crickets, but they're a specific type of crickets, bell crickets. They're widespread in Asian countries like China, India, and Japan. And I know this because of Animal Crossing. One of my friends really loves Animal Crossing, so I know of Animal Crossing, but I know that it would take too many hours of my life, so I never dived into it. But it says it's popular to keep them as pets. What this made me instantly think of is that just like Maomao is out here starting her MLM selling, she's forming a pyramid scheme where she's selling essential oils around. I feel like Shisui is competing with Maomao. Oh, Maomao, you have your essential oil business. I'm now selling bell crickets as pets. So these 2 women are going to be competing entrepreneurs for the rest of the episodes of season 2. I thought that was hilarious. So thank you, little dude, for that information. Beatriz Oliveira 9344 for episode 8 said, "Oh, my sweet summer child," which, yes, I am born in May, so I am indeed a summer child by birth. "You were uncomfortable thinking Anshi gave birth at 12. Well, she was actually 10. So there were several people in the comments, and the moderator asked me about it, being like, do you care if you know this? And I'm like, well, if they tell us in the novel prior and the anime is not going to probably ever bring it up, then I'm fine with it. And the moderator's like, well, they actually told us in season 1 in the novels, but it wasn't explicitly stated, probably because of censorship reasons, because 10 is disturbing, even more so than 12. So I was okay finding this out, and lots of people were commenting about it, and the mods were like, I think it's okay. And I'm like, yeah, it's fine. 10 years old is really young. Like 12 is bad enough. 14's bad enough. Anything that's a minor is bad enough. When she said in the last episode that her period came early, I was thinking because I was 11 when my period came, so which was early because my mom was 12. So I was thinking like 11, 12, but 10 is really early, and that's no 10-year-old is making a rational decision about sex. They're just not. So Beatriz gave the current ages according to the novel, which is that Anshi is 45. Woman looks damn good for 45. The Emperor is 35, which really makes me think that the Emperor and her probably grew up more like friends than mother and son, right? Right? I just finished watching a movie that's going to be on Patreon and then on YouTube here in a couple weeks. It's a commission. And in that movie, there is a woman that she adopts a kid. She adopts a baby at a young age. She's like 15 when she adopts this baby and wants to become its mom. And even then at 15, she's really young. And so the movie kind of touches on that relationship of, how young is too young. And so it talks a little bit about that, and that made me think of this. Ginshi's 19, and then Maomao is 18. The one thing I like about this series is that none of the characters are really, at least by Western standards, they're not minors anymore. Maomao's 18, Ginshi's 19, so we can have our sexy talks, and it's totally fine. But I really appreciate you telling me that. But yeah, the Emperor is my age. And so is Gaoshun, actually. So these people are too young to have kids. The third gray for episode 8 says, incidentally, this whole arc in the story puts a dark shadow on Li Shu's negative reaction to the class that Maomao taught back in season 1. I really liked this comment because I had not thought about it this way, but they say at the time the previous emperor's tastes were implied but not confirmed, and Maomao stated outright that the current emperor does not visit Li Shu because she's too young. Then her reaction could be taken as cute, that of an innocent 14-year-old, but now we really can't avoid the possibility that Li Shu was victimized by the previous emperor. Hopefully Li Shu's being allowed to return to the rear palace as the current emperor's concubine can be taken as an indication that she arrived too late, the first time for the previous emperor to visit her before she died. Yeah, before he died. I hadn't realized the dark connotation that kind of gives that scene in season 1 now, and this show is really good about adding like a subtle layer of darkness to everything, and when you look back on it and you're like, ooh, yeah, yikes. I don't think that the previous emperor, I don't think the late emperor visited Li Shu. I don't believe that personally, but my interpretation, now that we look back on that scene, is that when she saw the books, she saw what could have happened to her had he visited her. And that probably freaked her out, being like, oh, I dodged a bullet. That could have been really bad. And so she was probably like, nope, I don't even want to think of that. I'm still 14. No, thank you. And so that's my interpretation of it, but it's still really dark and really puts a layer on the situation that Li Shu's really lucky that the current emperor is a decent human being, which we'll talk about, later on in the comments. But thank you, the third gray, for pointing that out. Cough Me had some really good comments on YouTube and on Patreon, but one thing that they noted is that with this story, and especially with the late emperor, we have quote unquote potential childhood trauma, which in the worst case could have been repeated with Ginshi. But luckily, he was better raised and protected by Anshi, as we saw in episode 8. Yeah, Anshi, one thing that I love is that there's this concept that we're going to talk about perpetuating the cycle. And Anshi kind of gets caught up in that cycle, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But I like that Anshi stopped the cycle with Ginshi. She's like, no. And with her son, the current emperor, she's like, we are not going to be that way with my son and with my grandson. The cycle stops here. I'm implicated into it, but you both will not be. And I love her for that. I think Anshi is an amazing character, and she's so complicated and so complex, and I find her fascinating. And I love that she didn't let that cycle continue with her son and with her grandson. So speaking of that, Icy says for episode 9, we got a couple comments for episode 9. Icy says, I've been waiting for you to get here. I find Anshi so fascinating, and that's why I like her so much. I like almost everything about her. I was reminded of this saying in the Discord, hurt people hurt people. And that can be applied to almost all of my favorites. Which is, yeah, the cycle of violence, we've seen it in so many anime, or at least I've seen it in so many anime, but it definitely comes in the more sexual route in this one. I've been waiting to see if this episode altered your perception on Jinshi's nightmare. The way I interpreted the scene was that Anshi was protecting Ginshi from the Emperor. I don't think she wanted to risk him ever touching another child, as well as her combined hatred for the former Empress and all the other people in the room. I interpret it a little bit differently because we have not had anything that leads us to believe, we have no evidence that the late Emperor was interested in young boys. And I know that that's a slippery slope. That's a fine line. Again, I'm not condoning anything he did because we've seen repeatedly him after young girls. But there's nothing that we've seen, no evidence that would confirm that young boys were the same way to him. And I've watched enough true crime to know that usually it's with a lot of serial killers, it's kind of gender specific. But at least for a lot of the true crimes that I've watched. So my interpretation of it was kind of twofold. I think, one, she knew the late Emperor was also being, with the OG Empress right behind him, I feel like she knew that the OG Empress was having a hand in the situation, and she did not want his tendencies to pass on to her grandson. So she puts herself right smack dab in the middle, being like, I'll implicate myself, and I have implicated myself, but you're not going to influence my grandson, aka my son, like you have been influenced by your mother. That's one of the interpretations that I had with it. But I also think that there is kind of an interesting point to this, where the emperor is trying to he's not trying to put his hand on Ginshi in a sexual way. He's trying to give Ginshi the pigment. And to me, I feel like it's a connection between those two figures who are not meant to be rulers. I feel like it's a sign in Jinshi's nightmare that he doesn't want to rule and he doesn't need to rule, or he's going to become miserable like his grandfather was. I took it as the emperor was handing him the pigment, being like, look, I have other interests, but I wasn't allowed to explore them. Again, not an excuse for what he does to young girls at all, but I think it's him trying to tell Ginshi, being like, I didn't deserve to rule, you don't either. And I feel like, because it's a nightmare that's mixed with Jinshi's memories, I feel like it's a sign from the show to say that Ginshi is kind of similar to his grandfather in the sense that he doesn't need to be a ruler. He has too many passions elsewhere, like with Maomao, that he's not meant to be an emperor like his father is. So that's my interpretation of it. But again, it's fiction. Until we have concrete evidence, or until the mangaka and the author says so, we can interpret that scene however we want to. But I think it's so fascinating, and Anchi is such a fascinating character. And then H Banana 7 says for episode 9, the voice actress of Maomao has said that she had much difficulties grasping the role. She couldn't help but gradually act nicer to Ginshi as the story progressed, but the director kept rejecting the cuts. They finally told Maomao that she was supposed to be an aloof cat who only is nice when getting a treat. Which makes a lot of sense now that Maomao, she's so cat-like, she's like, just keep bribing her. But otherwise, she's just gonna like let things slip. H Banana 7 says, I also think the lady in yellow is Anchi. After all, the yellow was her favorite color. And that, to me, the fact that he drew her in the adult form in the end, and especially after she came to him, like, again, I'm not going to excuse her assaulting him, even though he, in my mind, deserved it. But, I mean, who am I to say that? But I do feel like she implicated herself in the cycle, just like he had been part of the cycle. But she stopped the cycle with how she raised her son and her grandson, because she's like, it's going to end with me and him. It's not going to go this way towards you. So it's so good. It's so good. I love this series so much. I'm having so much fun with it. But yeah, I'm really excited to see what we get in episode 10. We're close to the last part of the cour, so I will say what I was recording earlier today before my internet came back on is I'm going to be able, fingers crossed, all things good considered, I'm going to be able to watch this episode, episode 11, and episode 12, and then the team that I coach are going to nationals for a week. So I will unfortunately have to take a week off for episode 13 and get to episode 13 the week after we get back. But I already have something recorded that's going to take its place. So it's going to take its place on the channel. I'll talk about it in the April update video that's going to be out way sooner than it feels it needs to be, because this month is flying by. But I do feel that I will have something to replace for episode 13, and then we'll have, I think my plan is to have episode 13 the following Wednesday, and then episode 14, which would have been what was supposed to be that week, like on that Sunday or something, to catch up. And then we'll just have like 2 Apothecary episodes that week to make up for the one that was gone. That's my plan anyway. I'll definitely update it as I go, but just to give y'all a heads up. But I'm glad that we'll at least finish the cour before I leave for my trip, because I was really worried about that. I'm like, oh, am I going to leave and miss episode 12? I don't think I will. I think I'll be able to get episode 12 up before I go. So anyway, I've talked for nearly 15 minutes. We're going to start episode 10 of Apothecary Diaries Season 2. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's do this. Oh, I really underestimated this episode. I thought going into the ghost story chat, I thought it was going to be a very just like filler episode where we just had kumbaya moments, and I thought the 3 sisters were going to be involved. I had a whole thing planned. Nope. That's not what this episode ends up being. And I was like, it was like a straight up assassination attempt. And of course, Maomao downplays it because she's like, I was half asleep anyway. Hey, we need to talk about this a bit. So this season, going back to the OP image, at this point with the OP image where they have all the hands demonstrating things, I think I've been wrong this whole time. I have thought that each episode would have an image that would be connected to it. I have been quite wrong. We've seen the mushroom. We've seen the pigment piece. We've seen the lunar moth. We've seen the bows. We have seen the frog bouncing around in a prior episode. We've seen the flowers. We've seen the black ribbon. We've seen the little envelope filled with medicine. The only thing that has not really come in this season that's taken place again is the little rock at the top and then Ginshi's hairpin. Everything else has been seen throughout the season so far. And we only have theoretically 2 episodes left of the course. So maybe that's what it means. They were just like, here's 12 items you will see throughout the season, core 1, and then we'll do something new for the second core, I guess. But before we dive into this episode, because this episode has a lot going on, this season here, I brought Whiteboard Kun out because I want to talk about this. Season 2, which it's the second season, so it's really on the nose. This season is all about mirrors, all about family, and all about doubles. It's all that has been the consistent thing brought up so far in this series. And it's funny that season 2 that this is really coming to light. But I want to share with you, I wrote out all of the pairs that we need to talk about in this, that we probably do. And I'm even forgetting them as I was writing them. I'm even forgetting about some. I'm sure that I'm going to miss some. But here are the ones that stand out to me of mirroring, pairs, duos, familial things that we need to keep track of. So as a whole, from season 1, we had the concept of the concubines versus the princesses in the brothel house versus the concubines and the consorts that are with the emperor in the rear palace. And we've spent a little bit of time in this episode talking about how they are so similar, how they are different, how they mirror each other, but how they contrast each other. And we focused a lot on that in season 1, and we're getting into it in season 2. Then we had Locken and Loman, who are related, but they are both the father, the biological father, and the adopted father of Maomao. So they both are father figures. There is the connection between Feng Xin and Locken and Maomao and Ginshi, and those 2 pairings. And there's also a connection between Maomao and Feng Xin, her mother. So there's those connections there. And there's connections between Locken and Ginshi. So we talked about that in season 1. So all of that was season 1. And then a couple of these others are, which we'll get down into it. But then this season, we've talked about the mirroring between the contrast between the OG emperor and the new one, even though they're father and son. We've talked about the empress and the current emperor, or the empress and Anshi, and how they are different and how they've raised their children different. We've done that. We've talked about the OG emperor and Anshi and their connections and their differences and how they've handled gaining power and having that power taken away. We've talked about that. We've talked about the current emperor and the OG emperor. And then also how they each relate to Ginshi, the OG emperor, and their similarities to Ginshi in their looks and also somewhat maybe ineffectiveness at being a leader. But also Jinshi's been trained by the current emperor that if he needs to step up and be the emperor, he knows all the duties. He's been working with Gaoshun on that. He seems resourceful. He's persuasive. So there's all those connections as well, even though I don't think the current emperor really wants Ginshi to be the emperor. I think he's trying to get around that because he knows Ginshi doesn't really want to do it. It's just like a last resort. So he's trying to have these other heirs. So there's that. But then there's also Ginshi with the brother/uncle that died and the mirroring of that and how Ginshi was born out of love and the brother/uncle was born out of hatred and that comparison. Then you have Lolan and Shisui, which I'm sorry. At this point, but again, Lolan and Shisui, they might not be the same person. I am 90% sure that they are the same person. There's a good chance this show's going to pull the rug out from under us and be like, oh, well, we gave you all those clues, but they're red herrings. She's not actually Lolan. Here's something else. But maybe she's a sister. Maybe she's a twin. Maybe they're cousins. Like the envoys that are cousins that look exactly the same. It could be something like that. We don't know yet. But I feel like Lolin is either Shisui or they are siblings or cousins, and it's going to be like an envoy situation, and we just don't have all of the evidence. But the moment that Maomao was like, she seems familiar, I was like, but Maomao has been wrong. Let's not kid ourselves. Maomao has been incorrect before, so we can't fully say it, but damn, this show is really wanting to confirm my theory. It's really wanting to do it for me, and we're so close. We're so close. But anyway, we're going to get into that. Don't you worry. But then there's also Lihua and Shin. There's Lihua and Gyokyo. There's Gyokyo and Anshi. Then there is Lishu and Anshi, because, you know, they both were children that were had predatory relations with the OG emperor. And then there's Lishu and Aduo, and then there's Anshi and Aduo, because it's like Aduo was with her son, so there's that, and they were probably closer in age too, right? And then there are Suirei and Shisui, who have been like the Moriarty and Watson to Maomao's Sherlock. And then there's Suiren and then Aduo's lady in waiting and their similarities. And then we just threw in three sisters who look the same, because why not? We've already had all this talk about mirrors and doubles and copies. Why not throw in three ladies in waiting that look exactly the same, but just swap the eye color palette? I spent a solid 5 minutes I was like, oh my God, I'm going to throw my neck muscles out with that. But, this season is just crazy, y'all. Crazy. So I like that we start with the envoy, with the carriage coming into the palace, showing that there's still trade. There's still throughout all of this. I think that having that guy come through with the carriage at the beginning of the episode, while it seems so trivial, it's showing that things are still happening. Like, business is carrying on. Things are in motion all throughout. Even during this little episode where we're telling a ghost story, there are things being set in motion that we, the audience, aren't even aware of, but are happening in the show, and we will just find out when it becomes necessary. So we have these three new ladies in waiting in the Jade Pavilion. Okay, now that we have them side by side, and it took a second for me to be not thrown off, they have the exact same anime side bang that is every wig maker's nightmare. I'm sorry. I've had my bangs do that once before, and I was like, please don't. When I get my hair cut, I'm like, I want the millennial side bang. I need them to fall a certain way. I hate the idea of having something on my nose. No, thank you. I feel like everybody has to wear a wig with the little side, like the Kingdom Hearts Sora thing. I'm like, God, no. But yeah, their face shapes are pretty much the same. Their eye shapes and eyebrows are pretty much the same. There's a little variance. There's a tiny little touchy variance. But their eye colors are different. They have different little wavy parts that come down. And they have that stupid, what is this bun that defies gravity that looks like, girl, why? No. Stop that. I like that the one sister's solution was, oh, you can't tell us apart. Instead of like, oh, we'll change our hairstyle, we're just going to get a different color ribbon. Like, screw you, Maomao, learn our names. So it's Haku is the oldest, who's around the same age as Gyokyo. All those sisters look the same. Genetics, man. Haku, Koko, and Seiku. I tell myself I won't remember them, but I think I did okay. I think those are right. Koku's the middle one, and then Seiku is. I'm curious what their role is going to be in this. They're friends of the one girl that goes on the ghost story thing with her. They're all from the same hometown, and they all seem to like her. And so Maomao's like, okay, well, this makes sense. We're staffing women from the same hometown as the trusted ladies in waiting, because it's like everybody's in the know. Gyokyo's like, I need some more ladies in waiting, but I don't want to hire random women because I don't know if I can trust them based on all the shenanigans that have gone down. So I like the idea that the one, is it I always get her name confused. I'm going to have to look at it this episode because I always get her name confused. But she found three of her friends from her hometown and were like, come on in, you guys are all sisters, it'll all work out. I could see it kind of being advantageous too if they all look the same, because you could do stuff with that, I guess. Kind of like, again, we've talked about mirrors and deception and stuff in this season. So I honestly was surprised how little we got from them this episode. I thought we'll get into it with the fire and the gathering. I thought they were going to be involved in the fire and the fireside stories. I thought they were going to be involved in it, but they were not. And I was really surprised by that. So we're going to have to talk about that. But yeah, so then they say all their names and she's like, oh, I'm the taster Maomao, Lady Koku. And she's like, oh no, I'm Haku, not Koku. And she's like, and so I guess their names are all tied to their colors. I think her color was blue or navy. And she's like, I can't tell them apart, but I got time to learn. Maomao and I focus on the same way. I am a face person. Once I see somebody's face, I usually remember it, especially if it's somebody I see a lot. I'm god awful at names. All of my memory went into learning names from these series on the channel. In real life, I'm like, who are you? So but yeah, I'm like Maomao. I'm like, oh, I'll figure it out. It'll be fine. So Maomao does not want to go back to her room. She wants to stay in the storage shed. She's like, oh, I want to keep using it. And the lady in waiting is like, oh, well, Hongnian wasn't serious about you staying in here all the time. She was just joking. You took the joke too literally. And she's like, but I already moved everything in. Girl has all of her plants hanging. She's got her weed dispensary lined up, ready to go. If the essential oils don't work out, girl has a Thrive ready to start and open. And then she's got all of her stuff organized. I mean, let's be real. I think Suiren would be very proud of Maomao and how she's organized everything and how it's neat and tidy. Suiren would be proud. I think she'd approve of this, being like, look at how organized everything is. I think Ginshi would be proud of how organized she was, but Ginshi would probably freak out at this and be like, girl, what we doing? I told you not to make medicine. She's like, you're setting a bad example for the ladies in waiting, but she's got everything set up. And meanwhile, these three ladies in waiting are like, do we do anything? Is this how it always is in this place? And they're like, what are you two doing? And of course, Hongnian is like the lady in waiting final boss. Like she is, do not mess with Hongnian. She will mess up your shit. Right? I love her just dragging the two of them away. And the three ladies in waiting are like, the two younger ones are kind of like, interesting. But the older one, she seems a little bit more apprehensive. So I'm curious what she's thinking. Like, why is she so concerned? Maybe she knows something about, does she understand that Maomao shouldn't be making medicine? Does she understand that Maomao might be dangerous? I'm going to be curious to see what her opinions are. I thought we'd get them this episode, but we really don't. So when they said that the storage shed is now Maomao's nest, I was like, this episode is called A Ghost Story, by the way. I instantly thought of the ABO, the Omegaverse. Look, we've talked about this in the Discord, but I think we all need to face facts. If this were an Omegaverse, Maomao is the alpha. I'm sorry, Ginshi, but she is. And you most certainly are having those kids. Which would be amazing for an Omegaverse because Maomao doesn't want to have kids. She doesn't want to bear any children. So it would all work out just fine. Everything would be swell. So I'm just saying. That's all I'll say about it. But yeah. So Maomao does not want to leave the shed. And I like the Gyokyo. Lingli is getting huge. She is growing up so fast. She was such a baby in season 1, and now she is a toddler. She's like, well, you can do as you wish in the shed. I like Gyokyo's like, you're not going all Walter White on us. It's all right. She's like, get me the good shit, Maomao. Gyokyo's like, when I'm done having this baby, I expect to get the good stuff. So I do like that Hongniang's like, at least go sleep in your original room. Do not stay there all night. What if you light the place on fire on accident? Maomao's like, okay. She's like, everything worked out. I have great bosses. I can continue doing what I want, and I just have to sleep in a nice room. Okay. I love it. I absolutely love it. So they're all cleaning up everything, and Maomao makes note that now that there are 3 extra workers, it takes a lot less time to clean, which, yeah, no joke. I really like the idea that it takes, it's so true though. Once you get 3 other people on the job, things dramatically decrease in what you have to do. It's so nice. I know I've had people like come on in groups and be like, hey, I can help you. For my job, I used to have to input manually forms from high schools of students taking classes, which doesn't sound like much, but the forms would have probably about 25 to 30 lines of text that you had to manually enter in a computer. And when you had 800 forms, It would take you 8 hours a day, about a week and a half to do it all. And that's just you just nonstop doing it without stopping. I hated it. I stayed late after work. It was annoying. I worked way extra hours than I needed to. And then at 1 year, my boss was like, hey, these other 2 people can help you with that job. Girls, gentlemen, it cut down so much. I was like, where have you been all this time? Taking a third of my load, each of you? Oh my gosh. It instantly made it so much more manageable. So I totally understand the sisters instantly helping to make the workload so much easier. But yeah, she's like, given her pregnancy, Lady Gyokyo needs workers now more than ever. So they each wore different colored bands. One kept the white on. The other one wore red and the other one wore dark blue. So that's interesting. Got our Star Spangled Banner sisters that have joined the crew. And she says this is to balance things out with Concubine Lowland's Garnet Pavilion, which has a huge head count. I'm sorry, but Lady Lowland, she ditched. And here's the thing. When Lowland first showed up after Aduo left, when Lowland first came on the scene, if you all recall, she took Aduo's like tiara or the crown or whatever that she wears from the concubines, and she went tacky and threw it out and has this giant thing that looks like a freaking giant insect, which is going to tie to her scary story that she tells. And I'm like, wow, you really got a lot of insect themes going on here. Kind of like someone else who's collecting bugs and telling stories involving insects. Can't imagine. Oh, she's like a praying mantis. Maybe that's why the emperor doesn't want to get with her. She might kill him. She might kill him afterwards. Who knows? But yeah, I still think Lowland having all of these handmaidens and just numerous ones is like smoke and mirrors. It's a way to cover herself when she leaves the pavilion. So she's like, well, I'm off to the shed now. Maomao's like, I'm off to make my drugs. Bye. So yeah, they're red, basically red, white, and blue. Or is one black? It looks dark blue. It doesn't look black. But yeah. And Yinghua. Yinghua is her name. I'm going to write it down because it will help me remember. Yinghua is, you would think I'd remember Hua because it's a flower. Yinghua is a literal saint. She is a lamb. She is a precious angel. And she just wants to help Maomao integrate with the new sisters. And the sisters act as she live in the shed and not her room. And Yinghua's like, well, and the one girl's like, even though she's her lady in waiting, like, isn't that weird? And Yinghua's like, no, it's just Maomao. She's a poison taster. It's fine. I'm curious what the eldest Haku thinks of all this. I'm so curious. Haku has thoughts about Maomao. I don't know what those thoughts are. I really thought this episode was going to tell us them, but that is not the case. So Maomao's back on the grind, literally, making medicines. When Yinghua shows up and says, hey, since you got the night off, I think it'd be cool if you, since you owe me, since I helped you out, if you would accompany me tonight. And Maomao's like, now, wait a minute. What is this? She's like, we're the only ones free this evening. That should have told me that she wasn't going to hang out with the other sisters because they were the only 2 that were free. I don't know exactly. I'm assuming the novel gets more into this detail. I don't know why Yinghua drug Maomao to the event to begin with. Here's what I thought was going to happen. I thought that when Yinghua was like, hey, you're free tonight, let's go hang out at this event, and we found out it was like telling ghost stories, I kept going back to, I love Free Iwatobi Swim Club. It's so good. It's such a good series. It's one of the first ones on this channel. It's near and dear to my heart. But in Free, in the first season of that series, they go on an outing, the boys go on an outing, and they go to this like spooky lighthouse, and they all get together and they tell ghost stories. And it's a way for them to bond and do like a team bonding exercise where they get to know each other by telling stories. And it's like just for fun, and it's really cutesy. And that's what I thought this episode was going to be. I thought it was going to be getting to know the 3 sisters and doing like this team bonding thing where Yinghua's like, let's tell scary stories from our hometowns. Come on, girls, we all know each other. And Maomao will get to know you too. I thought that's what this was going to be. I really thought that was going to be the thing. And it doesn't end up being that way. Yinghua takes her to the haunted place in the north. Everything's happening in this damn north side of the rear palace that nobody supposedly goes to, but everybody goes to. And I don't exactly know how we got from point A to point B of why Yinghua decided to take Maomao there, unless she was just trying to get closer to Maomao and have like a bonding experience because she doesn't think they're close. I don't know, but I thought it was weird the sisters weren't invited and they didn't end up showing. But I don't know. Because she says it's perfect timing. And Maomao's like, she got me. So Maomao asks if Lady Hongyang knows about this. And she says, yes, I got permission to go. And she's like, we're on the north side of the rear palace again, where there should only be old buildings out here. And so she's like, put on this thing. It felt like they were all going to a secret elusive club and or a cult in this moment, which I think it's interesting that you have all these women learning to read and therefore to possibly write. And so I would imagine that gatherings like this is kind of like a book club. They all get together and share stories and do stuff like that. Like that part didn't surprise me. And then we got to the scary house. When we opened up the door and the woman, I'm sorry, anytime we see characters with certain hair colors in this show or certain eye colors, I pay attention because this show has been known to connect those characters together. Like, no offense, nobody in season 1 had blue eyes like Locken and Maomao. So the moment we saw Feng Shen had like garnet colored eyes, I was like, ah, so Locken's her dad. It was like one of those moments, right? In the back of your head, you're like, mm-hmm. And that's why, to me, Lolan and Shizui are the same person because they have the exact same hair and eye color, and nobody else has the same hair and eye color except some of her ladies in waiting. And I'm like, again, I just don't know for sure. I don't like to make conjecture, but I'm pretty solid on that theory. So when we saw this woman with the blue hair, I instantly thought of two people. I thought of Sui Ray, and I thought of the woman from the last episode that supposedly had a child that was left and the emperor kicked her out. So here's the question. We need to know the woman that was abandoned would probably be between the current emperor and Anshi's age. So she's probably between, 35 and 45, around that. This woman looks that. She looks that age. That seems legit. But if she was having a child around the same time that Anshi, between when the emperor was born and when Ginshi was born, so that child would probably be in their 20s. Well, gee, who looks like they could be in their 20s? Sui Ray does. She looks like she could be in her 20s. And she has blue hair like this lady. So if that lady, my big question throughout this entire series is, who is Sui Ray? Why does she have a stake in things? The answer to that question could be that Sui Ray is the illegitimate daughter of the OG emperor and the illegitimate sister of the current emperor. And this woman is like, I want my daughter to have a stake in what's going on. I had to have this kid when I was young. I want her to have a stake just like Ginshi and just like the OG or the current emperor does. And maybe Sui Ray is mad because of what her mom went through. Maybe she's mad about how women are treated in the system. Maybe she's just like, F it, I'm going to kill them all. That's my tinfoil hat theory. I've got two tinfoil hat theories in this series so far. I think that Lolan is Shisui. I think they're the same person. I think that Sui Rin is the daughter. I think Sui Ray is the abandoned child. But it said she was raised by a doctor. So that could still work though. Because Sui Ray could have been her child and she was raised by a doctor. And a doctor raised her. Didn't they say in season 1 that she came here with a doctor? Didn't they say that? I don't want to look up Sui Ray because I think that will give me spoilers. But I want to go back to season 1 of the Apothecary Diaries and pull this up. Because what episode does she show up in? Sui Ray appears in, what episode did she first show up in? Was it episode, I just want to know, the episode 13. Okay, that's all I needed. I was like, find things without looking at any spoilers. So serving in the other court. It was when the second court started. Sui Ray showed up. Okay, I want to find out where she was. This series makes you go back and see things from long ago. Man, episode 13 was wild, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. So she showed up. What else did we get? And that's when she appeared. Okay, and looking at her, Yeah, I mean, she does not look anything like the OG Emperor at all. She doesn't look anything really like him, except she has like the way, but the woman has wavy hair as well and has kind of the same face shape, but she has blue eyes. Did this woman have blue eyes too? We're going to check and see. Hmm. I don't know. But then again, we haven't seen the OG Empress either because the current emperor looks nothing like his dad. So genetics, y'all. I just okay. That's my. I want to say though, if I am remembering correctly, and I may have to go back before episode 11 and check this for myself, but I wanted to say that Sui Ray was trained by a doctor, which would fit the story. So if Sui Ray is the illegitimate child of the old emperor, we'll see. We'll see. So anyway, so yeah, Maomao notices that she seems a bit old for a court lady. Well, that could very well be. But yeah, she has her eyes blue. If her eyes are blue, I'm like sold on it because hair and eye color in this series, I tell you. But she has hair and facial structure and things similar. It's just her eyebrows are not as bushy as Sui Ray's. Sui Ray has very thick eyebrows, but that means nothing, right? It means nothing. So yeah, so he's talk about the number of court ladies compared to back then has gone down quite a bit. And she's like, for occasions like this place is perfect. I think her eyes are blue. I'm telling y'all, other than the eyebrows, Sui Ray is fitting the bill. So they bring these ladies together. One of them happens to be Shisui. Now the question is, did this woman, who was she trying to kill? Because she was trying to kill people. I don't know if it was, here's the thing, was she trying to kill all of them? Because she was basically shutting up the windows, and it was kind of like carbon monoxide poisoning. It was just like slowly poisoning them in the air, and that's what was making her, because carbon monoxide poison will make you sleepy and you fall asleep and that's how you die. I mean, it's not a terrible way to go, but not good. So was she trying to kill all of them, and this was just a vendetta against the emperor? And it was just, against the emperor, being like, I just want these women to not suffer like I suffered, so I'm going to kill all of them, which hints that you're next. I feel like that's what Maomao thinks. I think Maomao thinks that this woman was trying to kill all of them so that they didn't suffer like she had suffered, and that was just her way of doing it. But then there are two other possibilities that are included in that. Was she targeting Maomao because Sui Ray's told her, or someone else has told her, or such and such? Because Maomao does not want to admit it, but Maomao is getting real chummy with Ginshi, and ergo getting chummy with the current emperor and the Dowager Empress. So girl's making some friends in high places, which would make her a bit of a target. And she's the taste tester for Gyokyo, who's probably could be pregnant with the emperor's heir if it's a boy. And she's also freaking Sherlock, and people are going to find out that she's solving all the mysteries. So Maomao is painting a target on herself. Whether she wants to remain aloof about that, she can, but I think that people are starting to take notice. And Sui Ray knew about it, so we don't know what Sui Ray is doing behind the scenes. The other thing is, was she targeting Shisui because this woman believes that she's Lowland? At first, in the reaction, I thought she was targeting Shisui because I thought she'd figured out Shisui was Lowland and was like, I'm going to prevent you because you're a concubine, you're a consort. I'm going to prevent you from suffering like I suffered at the hands of the emperor and get you out. And then you won't have to have the same fate I did. Because, I mean, I think the biggest deal is that the current emperor is not like the OG emperor. If Li Hua has a child, it's going to be treated with the same amount of love as Ling Li and Gyokyo's second child. I fully think so. I think the current emperor's a nice guy. I think he'll be fine. But this woman is so jaded from how the previous emperor was, because she literally was shunned along with her child, that she probably just has a very jaded perception of how the current emperor would act, being like, well, you're just going to be like your dad, even though that could not be further from the truth. Right? So Also, I was thinking about it in the very end scene where Ginshi, I'm gonna go ahead and bring it up, where Ginshi has the cup and he's drinking the liquid that's, you know, preventing him from getting an erection. He's drinking that. It's such an interesting contrast to where Ginshi is willingly disabling him from having sexual interactions with people versus the old emperor that was willingly putting himself in sexual relations with people, whether he wanted it or not. Mirrors and contrast and doubles and all this fun stuff of this season. So yeah, they tell the ghost stories. And I like that the whole time the ghost stories are going on, Maomao is putting things together of why this is such a weird situation. But apparently this used to be like a thing that normally happened. They would go around telling ghost stories. It makes sense. It was a way for the ladies in the court to gossip. They could go to the rear palace and gossip about things without having to worry about it. It seems like it's a yearly event. So even though I was like, is this how Shizui's been learning the gossip? I doubt she's come to these events before because she hasn't been here. But I'm not surprised she's here because Shizui wants to know all the tea. And so this is her way of learning it. So, but yeah, this woman, I want to see. Yeah, she looks like she has eyes that are, she looks like she has eyes similar to Shizui. To Sui Rei. Anyway, Yinghua's hilarious. So they tell the stories and they blow out the candles one by one. Also very clever, if you're going to kill them all with, you know, smoke and poisoning, having all the candles out means that the bodies would drop dead and you could sneak out before anybody detects that there's anybody in the building. So that's clever on her part. So they start telling ghost stories, and I am surprised Maomao didn't interrupt and say, oh yeah, I solved that case back in season 1. But then again, Maomao is being nice, and she's also trying to figure out what's going on throughout all of this. But yeah, they get around to different stories, and then Shizui reveals that she's here. I like that as they're telling the stories, Maomao looks over, and she starts to yawn, and then Shizui's like, oh, hey, good evening. And she just brings up a fried squid. Like, girl just showed up being like, want a treat? I really hope that if Shizui is Lolan, my biggest fear is that Lolan and Maomao, if it is the case that she's Shizui, that they won't be able to be friends. I really don't want that because I love Shizui and Maomao's relationship. I love they're both weird, and I love that they're both like quirky, and I love Shizui just likes collecting bugs and being weird and kind of morbid, and she just has like random things like dried squid with her, and Maomao doesn't judge her. She's just like, oh sure, thanks. Like they're just such good friends, and I love that. I don't want that to be ruined if we find out that she's actually a consort. I'm like, oh, I don't want that. I'm hoping that Shizui wants to live her Princess Jasmine fantasy and that this is her way of doing it and she gets to keep doing it. I wish, but I don't know if that's the case. But yeah, I just love that Maomao's like, thanks, and takes it. Girl is just she's definitely like manic pixie dream girl sometimes. So they talk about the forest where the kid brings back, and of course it's like, the mushrooms that are poisonous, and that's what ended up poisoning her. I didn't take into consideration that the mushrooms glowed, and that's what made the green foxfire. Because when I saw the green light, I'm like, oh, it's like a foxfire spirit, and I thought that was part of the story. But it makes sense when Maomao retells it to say, no, it really was from the mushrooms when they brought it back. Because then we see it reflected in the torch later on with the red light. So that was really interesting. I also liked that Shizui at the end, that's super grisly when we see the woman's face and the eyes are blacked out. I don't like it. But I liked at the end of the story, Shizui was like, what was the solution? What was the secret? Like, girl wants to know. She wants to know just like Maomao does. And Maomao's like, I'll tell you later. I'm glad they actually came back around and let her tell her because I was afraid it was just going to drop off and we were never going to see the ending of it. And then she says, I keep on being sleepy for some reason. That should have rang out as a red flag that she was sleepy in the small space. It should have read as suspicious. I should have picked up on that, but I was thinking it was more played off as a joke. And then, no, but we get it at the end. It made for a good reveal. So then Shizui tells her story about a distant land far off to the east. You know, like where she's from. And I don't know if it's a story that, you know, she's told, that has been told to her by her people, you know. I mean, far off to the east, where isn't Lolan from the east? Isn't she from the east? Because Gyokyo's from the west. Isn't that the case? You all have told me at some point. I'm sure you'll say it in the comments down below. But this monk goes into the house. It's very Hotel California. Very Scooby-Doo Zombie Island. When he walks in, and the fact that they're so nice to him, when the one man looked very unhappy about it, I was like, oh, but then we find out that she's the demon. She's like the praying mantis that eats the man. The monk was going to be the one that was sacrificed, but he's chanting the sutras, and because he's chanting these spiritual sutras, she as the demon can't see him. So instead she goes to the man and eats him instead. Which, this story about a monk praying and then this woman tearing apart a man and then all he finds outside are insect wings. I mean, it fits Shisui so well. And I'm like, oh girl, if she's Lowland and talking about how she's gonna like eat her competition, I'm like, oh yes. It was so creepy and it was such a great story. And like Maomao was like, she's really good at telling stories. Maomao was like, this was actually kind of creepy and scary. I was all for that. I loved it. I loved how they did it. The wings of insects. And that seems like her calling card. If she's Lowland's crown has the insect wings coming off of it. And I'm like, oh. So she's like, if you're a good person and you have faith, you won't get attacked. But if you're not a holy good person, I'm going to kill you. And that ties to Shisui though, because Shisui talked about in the last episode how she was so proud and idolized Anshi because Anshi got rid of eunuchs and the slaves and like helped all the other women out by not letting them get taken advantage of by people like the late emperor. And I'm like, oh, that connects to this story really well. And I'm like, I'm curious if Lowland and Shisui are the same person, what Lowland's endgame is with the current emperor, because the current emperor seems very nice. He seems perfectly fine. I wondered at first if Lowland came to the Imperial Palace under the assumption that the current emperor is the same as the OG emperor, and that's why she maybe was like targeting him. But we've seen that they're very different people. So I don't know if she's realized that or if she's still under that assumption. I don't know. I don't know what Lowland's end game is, or if her dad is determining the end game, or how that's working. That's still like a big question mark as to what her point of being there is. And if her interacting with Maomao and learning about the rear palace through possibly being Shisui has altered what that original plan was and what those original perceptions were. I'm so curious. This series has a way of giving you crumbs at different random points, but then being like, oh, we'll put them together when you least expect it. And I'm like, so yeah. So then it gets to, and then Maomao says when she's a storyteller, she seems like a different person. Wow. You know what? That's so funny because Lowland likes to dress up as different people all the time. And it'd be crazy if she was acting like a different person to hide the fact that she is someone different. No one is going to convince me that Lowland is not Shisui until the show comes out and tells me I'm wrong. There's so much evidence mounting that unless it's this big twist that is just going to come out of nowhere, it's either going to be an obvious like, da-da, or they're going to be like, actually, it's this twist on what you think it is. So like Shisui's her sister or something, or cousin. But no, it's definitely I'm 95% sure now. So Maomao tells a story from her adopted father. The funny part is that it's a terrible ghost story. It's not even a ghost story. She's like, oh, by the way, there's these guys investigated and they thought it was this, but it was just a grave robber. It was so funny how short the story was, and everybody's like, oh, that's it? And then poor Yinghua, she can't even think of a story. And then it goes back to the woman. She's like, I'll tell the final story. I thought the 13th ghost story would be, I thought that the woman in the middle made 13, but there were only 12 of them all together. So the 13th ghost story was going to be all of them dying. That makes more sense. So she starts telling this story as they're all starting to pass out. And she probably started telling the story as each of the women before started to pass out. She's like, there's only 12 of us here. What does that mean? And she says, back then the rear palace was growing, always adding new sections. And I was like, oh, we're getting her. She's in the story. And then she said, for what? And they're like, for what reason? At the time, the great Empress Dowager, who was also known as the Empress, wielded all of this immense power. She was trying to find girls who would fit the late emperor's tastes. And then when Maomao was starting to fall asleep, I was like, oh no, don't do that. And it did not register to me that something really bad was happening because I was like, I kept wanting her to stay awake so she could hear the story. The late emperor chose the youngest girls, deflowering them one after the other. So I guess only Anshi had the baby and the woman that had the baby that was taken by the doctor. The girls spent their days in the rear palace, barred from ever leaving. So here's the thing. She is the woman, I am 99.9% sure, that had the baby and was dispelled because the Empress didn't approve. It wasn't a son, so she disproved and sent the baby away to be like, we're not going to talk about this one, and got sent her to the doctor to go away, and she stayed in the palace after she was discarded. I think that baby is Sui Ray. And then one of the girls became pregnant. And then she started talking. She's like, she petitioned the late emperor, but he wouldn't accept her. She was never allowed to leave the rear palace. And right before her death. And so when she said right before her death, she said, it's your turn next. So when she told this story, I assumed that the woman had died that was being talked about and that this woman might have been the daughter. But that doesn't make sense with the ages, I don't think, unless but she would be younger than the current emperor. And I don't think she looks younger than 35. So I think before her death means that she either expected to die with all of these women, or that was just part of the ghost story. And she's like, actually, I'm going to live, but I'm going to become a ghost and you'll never see me again because I'm going to leave town after killing you all and then go. When people do crazy things, sometimes their motives, are kind of crazy too. And that's when Maomao's like, shit. And she ends up opening the window to air out. Yep. And to get Yinghua. She's like, I was getting dizzy. And it was from that. I like that Shisui stayed up too. The smoldering fire was filling the room with bad air. And by that point that they get everybody to the window, and she's like, I was so close. And then she leaves. Again, I don't know if she was just targeting all of the women, or targeting Maomao, or targeting Shisui, or if she's been working with Sui Ray. We don't know. We don't know, damn it. Okay. And they're like, oh man, what a night. The organizer disappeared. And Maomao's like, yeah, about that organizer that was super creepy. And then Shisui shows up and Maomao's like, oh no, she's an acquaintance of mine. It's fine. So then she finishes the story about the mushrooms. And Shisui's like, oh, so that's what it was. Oh, Maomao. That's so funny you figured that out. That's so cute. She's like, glad it's all cleared up now. Bye. She wanted to know the tea. She wanted to know what it was. And she was so curious. She had to know. She's like, I'm going this way. I'm going this way. Don't follow me. I'm going to actually turn around and go the other way back to Lowland's Palace. And so then Yinghua says, now that I know the truth, it's not scary at all. I bet all the stories have backgrounds like that. Yeah. And again, it goes back to the theory of the theme of this show, that things that seem scary have a truth behind them. Things that seem unknown have an answer. It's just logically figuring out the conclusion and coming to that answer and making conjecture a reality based on the evidence that you find, right? And putting it all together. And Maomao's like, well, and so then Yinghua, when they go back to Hongniang, she's like, you guys are back earlier than I expected. She's like, well, there was a bit of a commotion. She's like, oh, I expected as much. I guess things could happen when the organizer is new. And so she's like, they're like a new organizer. And she's like, yeah, the court lady who organized the event last year passed away. And I was worried about who was taking over this year. And then they're like, wait, what? So whoever was the event organizer mysteriously died last year. And this new person took over this year. This new person that might be working with Sui Ray. Who knows? Like, she was a nice person and very helpful, and I got a lot of help from her as well. I guess she never got to leave the rear palace. But she actually had relations to the late emperor. So here's the thing. She said that gathering was the only fun she ever had. Here's my thing. It would be too bad if the event ended the very next year after she had passed away. I wonder, because they think that this woman that organized the event is the one that died. So did Suirei fake her death too, and she's actually still alive, and that's how this is going on? I want to know! And the fact that he just kind of like, in this episode with Yinghua going back to stay with her, and Maomao's like, wait a second. She's like, what do we do about this? And then we see her. That Court Lay story was her own experience. Mm-hmm. She has blue eyes. She has the same hair and eye color as Suirei. Is it a prank pulled by someone in the know? No, I think that's actually her. And I think she faked her death. And now she's working behind the scenes to cause a muck. Who knows? And of course, Maomao's like, we just don't understand things sometimes. I'm like, girl, but it'll all come out in the wash. I'm sure it'll all come out in the wash. That's what was so crazy about this episode, was that we get stuff revealed and we get stuff set up, and then they're just like, well, we'll just leave this over here for now. And I'm like, no, we need to solve those things. Son of a bitch. So then I like that Yinghua, she sleeps with Maomao, and she's all up in Maomao's space. And even though it's supposed to be cold, she's like making Maomao really hot and sweaty. To me, that showed me that Ginshi, I love you, dude, but I don't think you're going to be cuddling up against Maomao. I think she'll be like, it's too hot. I need my space. I know some people are like that. Some people are like, I can't snuggle up against somebody and sleep because it's just too warm. It's too sweaty. Meanwhile, speaking of which, Jinshi's there with the elixir that will hide his erection, and he sits there and drinks it as per usual. And that's the episode. This episode was really, really good. Really good. And I did not expect it to be. When I saw that we were going to this house to hear the ghost stories, I'm like, oh, this will be like a little filler episode. No, it was actually amazing. And now I'm super excited for next week. I'm so glad I get to see the next 2 episodes before I go on my trip. I'm really excited. So I'm very curious to know your thoughts about this episode and your comments down below. I know my theories are crazy and out there, and we'll just see if they pan out. So, but anyway, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more of the Apothecary Diaries. Bye.